I have rarely felt more inadequate in my life. I was asked to speak tonight. I prepared a thoughtful address. I had some rabbinic quotes. I'm not a rabbi, but I looked some stuff up, and I had some, quote stories, and you know me here tonight. After that testimonial by Cory Booker, after that inspiring story by Kenny Prager, which had me on the edge of my seat, and by that moving address by Mrs. Freeman, and if I am correct, she's the grandmother of one of my students. Do I have that right? The mother. Oh, I thought the grandmother. Forgive me. Okay, the mother of one of my students who just graduated. So we'd like to thank the Lubavitcher Rebbe said to us when we opened the college, I'm going to send you the best girls from all over the world. I didn't realize he was going to Iran to get me one, but okay. We'd like to thank him. So you can forget about the speech, because I'm not. It's hard. After what I've just heard, I feel utterly inadequate. I feel like the fourth wheel on a tricycle. But what I will do is, I think I have a little advantage in that I had both a personal and professional relationship with the Rebbe that I was very blessed and fortunate to have. So I will try. I'm not going to take the 35 minutes allotted to me. I think it'll be a little shorter because I'm cutting most of this, but I hope it'll be helpful. Let me start with the personal, then get to the professional, and tell a couple of stories. It was Senator Daniel Patrick Moynihan who said of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, he has the leprechaun's gift to look around corners and see opportunities nobody else was there. So I walk in here tonight, and there is Mrs. Lydia Zucker here. And I remember the story I wasn't even planning to tell, a story I haven't told in 40 years. When I started to work for the Senate, they told me there's a rule in the Senate. In the United States Capitol, you cannot wear a head covering, like Christians in church. You cannot wear a head covering in the Senate, on the floor, in the gallery. So they said just avoid the floor of the gallery or take off your skull cap. Well, I wasn't going to take off my skull cap, so I avoided the gallery. I went to see the Rebbe a few weeks later, and the Rebbe said to me, this is an opportunity to change the rule. Not for you, but for the first person who complains. And there was a young doctor who now lives in Teaneck. His name is Dr. Lyle Zucker. His wife is here tonight. And I forgot all about the story until I saw her tonight, that Dr. Zucker wrote me a letter and said I was in Washington, maybe take my yarmulke off. Senator Moynihan went to Robert Byrd, the majority leader, and said, wow, this is religious discrimination. We're fighting for religious freedom in the Soviet Union, and one of my constituents who's a Canadian citizen, but don't worry about it. It's forced to take off his skull cap. This is discrimination. 99-1, bless Jesse Helms. The Senate voted to change the rules to allow skull caps, religious garb. And somewhere Congresswoman Omar is thanking Dr. Zucker, because religious garb is allowed on the floor of the Congress. So that was just the Rebbe. What can I tell you? He saw opportunities. Okay, personal. My personal story starts very briefly 170 years ago. A little boy, 6 years old, is walking to Hebrew school, and he's captured by the Cantonistas. Every year, 15,000 Jewish children had to be delivered in a quota to the Tsar's orphanages, to be raised as the Tsar's children, to be converted to the Russian Orthodox Church, and to become cannon fodder in the Tsar's army. And this little boy, named Avram Shmuel, was one of them. Never saw his family again, forcibly converted to Christianity, raised in that orphanage. There was a man named the Tzemach Tzedek, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. When I once said to the Rebbe how wise he was, the Rebbe said to me, because I stand on the shoulders of giants. And then he smiled and said, that was Newton, right? And it was. And this was the Rebbe's great-great-great-grandfather, the third Lubavitcher Rebbe. And the Tzemach Tzedek sent shluchim. He didn't start with Dr. Prager. He sent shluchim into those orphanages to risk their lives in the middle of the night to teach those children about Judaism. Somehow keep them alive. And this boy grew up, became an officer in the Russian army. Only 11 Cantonese became Russian officers. Most of them died. Most of them were killed in battle. And he became an officer. At the age of 35 or 40, he left the Tsar's army. He went to the village of Lubavitch. The fourth Lubavitcher Rebbe taught him Judaism. They found him a spouse. And in 1904, they had one child, one son named Moshe Aram. And in 1905, their only son is drafted into the Tsar's army for the Russo-Japanese War. And his father sends him to the village of Lubavitch to ask the fifth Lubavitcher Rebbe what to do. And the Rebbe says, "Go in, it'll be good for you." Now, a wise man once said that coincidence is an 11-letter English name of God. Coincidence is an 11-letter English name of God. I walk in there tonight and there's Liv Yizuk here. This young man, Moshe Aram, listens to the Lubavitcher Rebbe, who after all his grandfather had saved his father, and his only child. And he shows up the first day at basic training, and the general wants to see you. The general wants to see me. What's going on here? General says, "Are you so-and-so's son?" "Yes, sir." "I saw your name." "Yes, sir." "Your father saved my life in the Battle of Stavropol. You are not going to go to the front. You are not going to Siberia. You'll stay here for a while." A couple of weeks later, he gave him papers to go home and papers to go to America. Got married, came to America, had 3 sons. The second one is my father, named Avraham Shmuel, after the Cantonista. That's why I'm here, guys. 1929, the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, having been miraculously saved from prison by Senator William Borah and the Almighty, comes to America for the first time. My father was already a little skeptical about all these stories I heard about the Rebbe from his father, but he comes along to hear this great rabbi speak. And the rabbi gives an inspiring address. He finishes the address. They're about to daven Ma'ariv, so we will tonight, the evening prayer. And a simple tailor, comes over and whispers something to the rabbi. The rabbi gets up there and bang, bang. "Before you start davening, before you start praying, this righteous Jew has corrected me. I made a mistake. I misquoted the mimer from so-and-so." And my father was thunderstruck. Here's this world-famous rabbi publicly correcting himself in front of 2,000 people who've never known the difference because the tailor politely told him he made a mistake, at which point my father was hooked. Father got a doctorate in psychology, became a very famous psychologist. His name's in a lot of the psych books, and Professor Abraham Luchins. And my dad, when the Frierdiker Rebbe came to America, spent time visiting him, spoke to him. In fact, there was a Pagisha once. My father was the guest speaker in 1978, and a fellow yelled out, "The Rebbe is Mashiach!" And my father said, "No, he's not. His father-in-law was." And the next day the Rebbe hugged my father and said, "Everyone needs to believe that about their Rebbe." Isn't that a great story? Rebbe Kotarski told me I can never tell that story anywhere, and I just did. You see, I'll probably, who knows what's going to happen to me. This is my last public address for Chabad. I think it's over. Nevertheless, it's a great story. I think isn't it a good story? Yeah, I love it. Anyway, I'm not allowed to tell it. Okay, back to this. I said the M word. Okay, back to our story. And so my father spent a lot of time visiting the Frierdiker Rebbe. He was a professor, my dad already. And he had prepared his first book. His first book published, ended up on 400 journal articles of 30 books. He brought his first book to the Rabbi Joseph Schneerson, who did not read English, to ask him for a blessing. Rabbi Schneerson said, "Give it to my son-in-law. He will give you some advice, and you're all going to listen to him someday." 3 years later, Rabbi Nachum Mendel was the Rebbe. And every one of my dad's psych books since then, the Rebbe wrote advice, comments. If you go to my father's books, the footnotes saying, "A learned friend suggested." And we have a cachet of letters back and forth where the Rebbe would give advice to my dad about these his psych books. It's a very special relationship. My father's at his desk one day, 1965, State University of Albany. He's a distinguished professor. And the phone rings. It's the Lubavitcher rabbi calling from Brooklyn. I must tell you the truth. I saw it with my own eyes once when I was home. The Rebbe called, my father stood at attention. So he had served in the U.S. Army, the commander-in-chief calls, you stand up. Dad, my father stood at attention. Yes, Rabbi Schneerson. I wasn't in the room, obviously, but I heard the story. Yes, Rabbi Schneerson. When you go to Russia, Rabbi Schneerson, your grandfather got my father out of Russia. I'm not going to Russia. When you go to Russia, please see me first. This is 1965, Dr. Prager. Now we're going to hear how it started in the first year of this adventures. Okay, the phone rings 20 minutes later. It's Governor Nelson Rockefeller. Remember, Governor Rockefeller is the governor of New York. My father has had one of the distinguished professorships at the State University of New York, which is pretty impressive. Hey, it paid I have no complaints, took good care of us as kids. And he says, Dr. Luchins, the White House is announcing in a few moments that you will be leading the American delegation to the World Psychology Convention in Moscow. This is a great honor to our university. We'd like to have a press conference. Please come here in about 2 hours to the state capitol. I need to have a press conference with you. And the governor's wearing his $2,000 Italian suit, Nelson Rockefeller. My father's wearing his $18, Harris tweed jacket, the professorial jacket he's been teaching in since the Truman administration. You got the picture. And the governor's effusive. But the Rebbe said, come see me. I was a freshman in college then in New York, Yeshiva University. Dad came down, and we took the train together to Crown Heights. We walked in, escorted in right away. You didn't have to wait in the line. It was great. And there is a suitcase, Dr. Prager, a big suitcase. And the Rebbe says, Dr. Luchins, you will be traveling to Moscow. You will be heading the American delegation. You will have full immunity. It wasn't entirely true, it was largely true. Full immunity on what you bring in and take out. There are 14 pairs of tefillin here. You're to wear each day to Moscow synagogue, sit in this row, this seat, and leave your tefillin there. Father says, Rabbi Schneerson, I'm there for 2 weeks. 2 of those days are the Sabbath. We don't wear tefillin on the Sabbath, at least I don't. The Rebbe smiles and says, 2 pairs of Rabbeinu Tam, special tefillin. You wear them on Fridays. And for the rest of his life, my father did, by the way. He took other rabbis. Yeah, but that's the kind of Jew they used to have, right? Anyway, father goes to Moscow. The Rebbe obviously has Ruach HaKodesh. The Rebbe obviously has superpowers. The Rebbe knew in advance about this. The second day there, and father had brought sardines and graham crackers, enough to feed an army. Second day there, the head of the psych department, University of Moscow, says to my father, will you join my wife and I for dinner? Boo, 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 boo. Then he leans over in Yiddish and says, don't worry, it's all kosher. The guy was a Chabadsker. Thank God he made it to Israel a few years later. And so that's how my father, when we got engaged, my wife and I got engaged, and my father was so excited we were getting engaged, and my wife's family is Rabbi Zdoiba, so it's a Chabad, nice Chabad family. So my father asked for Yechidut to see the Rebbe. He has to get him good news. He comes in, the Rebbe's babbling. He's babbling. Rabbi Schneerson, is everything okay? Dr. Luchins, said the Rebbe, you don't speak Greek? Well, no, sir, I don't. How do you not know Greek? I had to learn Greek to go into Sorbonne. You don't know Greek? Well, no, sir, I don't know Greek. I was quoting Aristotle. We got the whole conversation about Aristotle, Greek. Rabbi Gronis banging on the door. Half an hour later, there's a line down Kingston Avenue to pull my father out. Father comes home to Albany. Mother says, what does he think of the shidduch? I forgot to tell him. Phone rings 6 weeks later. Why does Rabbi Zdoiba in Denmark have to call to tell me that his niece is engaged to your son? I'm Rabbi Schneerson. I thought you know everything. The Rebbe laughs and says, I only know everything if you tell me everything. So this fellow in Moscow made the connections. We're going to end by returning to the story of my father's trip to Moscow. Just put that aside. Okay. The Rebbe was blessed with the ability to see around corners, see opportunities. Whether it was Lyle Zucker, he told to remove his yarmulke, whether it was matters of great global import. I'm going to tell 3 stories. 1, the Rebbe changing the world. 2, the Rebbe changing the country. And 3, the Rebbe changing one person's life. I have many stories. I picked these 3. I think they're good ones. Let me start with the first story. As Rabbi Prager pointed out, Dr. Prager pointed out, no one was more involved in keeping Russian Jews alive than the the rabbis of Lubavitch. From the very first one, from the Baal Tanya until the seventh one. They risked their lives. In the case of the sixth Rebbe, he was tortured and almost killed. And they kept alive, especially under the Tsar and even the crueler Soviet regime, keep Judaism alive. In 1991, when the Soviet Union ceased to exist, Pat Moynihan took the floor of the United States Senate. When history is written, two men should have the primary credit for the Iron Curtain going down, by Joseph Menachem Mendel Schneerson, and the United States Senator, I'll say the name. Senator Lieberman of Connecticut came over to Pat Moynihan and said, two Schneersons? I only knew there was one. So you got the idea. But back to our story. There was this whole movement to save Soviet Jewry. And the Rebbe was unbelievably involved on multiple levels. Are you related to Dennis, by the way? He's your... Okay, because Dennis and I had long talks about this. He was his cause. Publicly, the Rebbe was opposed to all demonstrations. I would say, in retrospect, he was absolutely correct. Absolutely correct. I heard this from Hubert Humphrey I worked for, I heard this from Henry Kissinger, I heard this from Pat Moynihan. Demonstrations were largely counterproductive. I'm sorry for those that believed in them. But the Rebbe, the Jackson-Vanik Amendment, publicly the Rebbe opposed it, privately pushed it like crazy. He lobbied it, helped get it through. And they started giving out Jews. The Jackson-Vanik Amendment said that if they want to have normal trade status, which then was called most favored nation status, to allow out free immigration. You know, when China was told that, Mao Zedong said, how many million do you want and what time tomorrow do you want them? But the Russians weren't that easy, so they were, it was a tough issue. And they started letting Jews out. 20,000, 50,000. And they didn't get it. And they decided they were being played. They decided Jews were the excuse, not the reason, and they stopped the immigration in 1970 by the time they invaded Afghanistan. The Rebbe was looking for an opportunity. And he found this opportunity just about the time you were going to Moscow, just about the same time. Ronald Reagan was in very serious trouble with the Jewish community. You know, for those with long memories, he tore up the agreement to share military secrets with Israel because Israel bombed the Iraqi reactor. He forced, she resigned, Jean Kirkpatrick to vote for a resolution condemning Israel in the Security Council. He stopped, you know, Israel had to hire a spy because he stopped sharing secrets. He cut aid, threatened to stop all military aid to Israel if Israel didn't leave Lebanon. He stopped the siege of Lebanon, and he saved Arafat and Now, I'm not here to attack Ronald Reagan, because we've got to see what he did to more, in my eyes, make up for it, and to the Rebbe's genius. And then he went to Bitburg. And who remembers Bitburg? Bitburg, Nazi war criminals. And he laid a wreath. And at that point, his approval rating in the American Jewish community, I'm not making this up, was 12%. That's hard to do. Marshall Brager, his top Jewish advisor, said to me later, we assumed we lost American Jews forever. One man figured out what to do at that moment. His name was Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson. And I worked with Senator Moynihan. We got an urgent call from this Rebbe to come to see him. I went with the Rebbe to the senator, and the senator said, this is a wonderful opportunity. Ronald Reagan is in terrible trouble with the Jewish community. He wants to make amends. He's a friend. Here's his chance. I'm a college professor. I don't like talking on this weekend. He said, here's a chance to make amends. And the Rebbe gave us a draft of a letter he had written. A letter for senators to send to Gorbachev, the new prime minister of the Soviet Union, offering a series of steps, a ceasefire, if you will, a series of steps. You release Sharansky, you do this, we'll do that. You do this, we'll reduce the Stevenson Amendment. We will and then the Rebbe wrote, now I still remember how stunned we were when we saw it. The Rebbe said, we will cancel Solidarity. Remember Solidarity Sunday for Soviet Jewry? The Rebbe wrote in the letter, to be signed by senators, that the American Jewish community will cancel the world's largest human rights demonstration if you do this and this. There was great skepticism. One guy, David Harris, he's head of the HAC, there was tremendous credit. He fought very hard for it. 57 senators joined John Hines and Pat Moynihan in signing it. 57 senators. So 59 in all. The letter went to Moscow. And we held our breaths. It didn't just go to Moscow. It didn't go to Moscow. It went to Iceland. Because there was a senator named Chick Hecht, whose family was Chabad. He himself was not. And Chick Hecht, at the request of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, took this letter personally to Gorbachev, signed by 57 senators. He gave it to Reagan to give to Gorbachev. Picture this, Ronald Reagan, meeting with Mikhail Gorbachev, I have a letter for you from 59 US senators, offering, if you will, a ceasefire in the battle for Soviet Jewry. In exchange for, in the Rebbe's words, he took the words of the Soviet Jewry movement, those words were, let them live as Jews, let them leave as Jews. I mean, I still have a copy of that. It was an astonishing letter. It was an act of, a leap of faith. And we held our breath. 2 weeks later, Max Kampelman, Yeshiva University product, U.S. ambassador to the arms talks in Vienna, is pulled aside by the Soviet ambassador. I have a letter for you to give to Senator Moynihan and Senator Hines. It's a letter from Gorbachev offering to accept the terms. Within weeks, as you know, its history, Sharansky was released, the Stevens Amendment was withdrawn, step by step, steps were taken, and within 3 years, we had freedom for Soviet Jewry. And the man who gets the greatest credit for that, the man of the insight and the courage, was Lubavitcher Rebbe. So that's one story. And by the way, to get the organized Jewish community to cancel that demonstration, the Rebbe was brilliant. The Rebbe said to Moynihan, don't mention my name. Just mention Harris's name. It was the American Jewish Committee, the Congress Committee suggested it. It was more American Congress suggested it. It was the OU that suggested it. The Rebbe had the wisdom and brains not to be up front of this one. Okay, story 2. There was a black congresswoman named Shirley Chisholm. She was the first black woman ever elected to Congress. When she was elected, the white Southern crackers that ruled the House of Representatives will put that uppity, I'll say black because I don't use the other word, woman in their place. And they announced in December that she was going to be placed on the Agriculture Committee. The Agriculture Committee in Brooklyn. What a joke. New York Times ran a front page piece. I'm not making, you can look it up. It's on files. Said, does a tree grow in Brooklyn, question mark? Shirley Chisholm. 20 years later, Shirley Chisholm died of her powers. One of the most deeply respected congressional leader, retired from Congress. And there was a whole series of parties in her honor, and there was one given by Senator Moynihan, because they were very close. And I was there. And maybe it was my kippah, even though Senator Moynihan insists he thinks Shirley would have said it either way. She walked in, she started talking and said, I want to tell you the single most moving thing that happened to me after I was elected. I had visited a rabbi in Brooklyn. We all have to visit him when you're running for office, because Crown Heights was in her district. You know, he didn't say 10 words to me, didn't even look at me. I thought it was good. I wasn't sure because I'm black, I wasn't a woman. He wasn't, it was problem, social, nothing, no conversation. She said, and then the New York Times came out that day. That afternoon, I got a call from the rabbi's secretary. The rabbi would like to see you, Congresswoman-elect Chisholm. So of course I went to Crown Heights, why not? I walk in, the Rebbe says, he had the paper there, he said, is this humiliating? She says, yes, it's humiliating. It's upsetting, it's upsetting. The Rebbe said, what a blessing, what an opportunity. She said, I said to myself, this rabbi's crazy. He said, Mrs. Chisholm, the United States is burning excess food. The farmers in Kansas can't sell what they're producing. It's not worth paying the rail fare to send it to the markets. Look at this article here in the business section of the Times. The Rebbe read the Times regularly. I can tell you that from other stories. And the Rebbe said, look at this opportunity. The government can give buy this food and give it to poor people. Their children are starving in America. And she said, thank you very much, Rebbe Schneerson. And she went down to Washington for the first briefing session. Before they're elected, they have these meetings. And there's the Agricultural Committee. And there's a freshman Democrat, Republican, from Kansas. You may have heard of him. His name is Robert Dole. He became a famous senator, minority leader, great American. And there's Robert Dole. And Shirley Chisholm introduced herself to Robert Dole. And Robert Dole says, she says, how are things in Kansas? He says, bad. Bad? She says, yeah. My guys are burning their crops. It's not worth selling. The rabbi, she said. He looked like she's crazy. And then she explained. And they got together. There had been a little pilot program called food stamps. The two of them put in a bipartisan bill on the first day to vastly expand it. And then they came up with an idea called WIC. And then step after step, after 17 days of the committee, they threw her off the committee. She was being a troublemaker. She went on to devote much of her congressional career to working in those areas, food stamps, WIC. And she got really emotional in front of a room of congressional aides and senators and congressmen. She said, if a child in Harlem had a cup of milk before they went to sleep tonight, if a coal miner's daughter in West Virginia had a lunch today, it's because of the vision of that rabbi from Brooklyn. And that was the Rebbe's genius. The Rebbe, Shirley Chisholm, was in tears, she said. And the Rebbe called her and gave her an idea. And that he helped change America and the world. And now I conclude with the story I told at my father's funeral. Now again, you pick a story you can say to tell at your father's funeral. It has to be a pretty good story. The story goes like this. There was a young rabbi in Rebbetzin, rabbi's wife in our community, who lived in the Bronx for 41 good years. And they both died of cancer a few months apart. We didn't know the first we didn't know he was sick until after she died. It was very, very tragic. The community was utterly traumatized by it. Very sad. And his wife, his sister from Israel had flown in. My wife, being a really good person, had served her a couple of meals. And we're in Israel 4 summers later. We go every summer to Israel. There's a phone call from this woman who my wife had fed some meals to. Mazel tov, my daughter Rochel is engaged to the son of a very famous rabbi. I recognized the name right away. Very big rabbi. Very famous rabbinic judge. His son's marrying my daughter, and you're going to come to the wedding. It's the summer. I got my straw hat. I got a green suit. I'm not going to a wedding. Hey, come on. You know, wife says you're going, you go. Go to the wedding, and they start the ceremony. And they're calling up these big league rabbis to have blessings. Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, the third rabbi, let's go look for Rabbi Kanievsky, he's a world famous rabbi. Fourth blessing, Dr. David Luchins. I go, oh. My suit's never been greener, my hat's never been strawer. I don't belong here, baby. This is ridiculous. My wife fed this woman 3 meals, and I'm getting, up there with the all-protein. I stumble through the bracha. I have my seat, and I can't even talk to my wife. This is one of these weddings with separate rooms, barbed wire, guard dogs, and no cell phones. We're going to meet at, 10:15 at night outside and get out of here. At 9:45, the father of the groom goes around the room, in the men's room, not the bathroom, the room the men are sitting. He's pouring everyone 1/18 of an inch of whiskey. Gets to me, pours me 3 inches of whiskey. I said, excuse me, your father could drink that. How's the rabbi know my father? Suddenly I understand I didn't get a blessing under this chuppah because my wife fed someone some meals. Listen how this story. He tells me the following story. He said, and he tells the date, and this date in September 1906. Someone tells you, in 2000, that on this date in September 1965, something happened. He said, it was a Tuesday afternoon. I was at a class in RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. My mother, professor of mathematics, was a very famous professor. She was, if I maybe boast and say, she was the first woman to be a tenured professor at an engineering school in the history of the United States, and an Orthodox Jewish woman with her hair covered, the wig, etc. So my mom gets up and she says, there'll be no class the next 4 Tuesdays, because it's Rosh Hashanah. She didn't say it's Rosh Hashanah, Kol Nidre, Sukkot, Simchat Torah. So I'm from Brooklyn. I put up my hand and I said, teach, I am from Brooklyn. There's no holiday the 3rd and 4th week, you're making it up. Making it up. Teacher says, see me after class. She says, here's our home phone number. If you want to find out about holidays, call and come. He comes, if it can't hurt the grade. He comes for Sukkot to my parents. I argued with your father. We argued for hours. Then I came back to Simchat Torah. We argued for hours. Then he whispers, says, you can't say this on everybody. And your father took me to the Lubavitcher Rebbe. This man had 6 Yechidus with the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He met 6 times with the Rebbe, which is unheard of today. This is the 60s. It was possible. It wasn't possible in the 80s. And he told us later a beautiful story. At one point, he said, but I want to be an engineer. Rebbe said, so did I. My wife had better ideas for me. Anyway, finally, he had the 6 Yechidus. He says, Rabbi Schneerson, I respect you. I respect Judaism. I will always be much more respectful, but it's not for me. I'm not prepared to live a life of an Orthodox Jew. Okay, fine. Dad goes to Moscow. Dad comes back from Moscow. The Rebbe calls and says, you must come. We're having a Farbrengen, a Hasidic gathering in your honor, because you went to Moscow. Okay. And the Rebbe says, and bring the engineer. Father calls him up and says, hey, I need a ride to Brooklyn. Okay, sure, No, the guy isn't to my mother's classes. He's not stupid. They drive down to Brooklyn. They come, and there's father sitting in the front next to the Rebbe. Imagine, father was so nervous he spilled his vodka on the Rebbe. He was like, whoa. Sitting next to the Rebbe for a whole big Farbrengen, can you imagine my father felt? I can't even describe it to you. Cannot describe it to you. I mean, I was in the back. I remember what it was like. He was like, I cannot believe this. And then this engineer is also in the back. 2 of the Hasidic kids are speaking, and he understands enough to understand what they're saying. Was the uncircumcised guy without a beard doing sitting next to the Rebbe? Shh! He's a great philosopher. He was a disciple of the Rebbe's father-in-law. Then it hit me, he said, in my scientific world, there's no respect for religion. These little Hasidic kids respect a scientist. So he went to send, next day he asked for Yechidus, the 7th and last one. He said, for Schneerson, you win. To see my master's, in June, I will go to Morristown to learn Torah. No, you won't, said the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Here's the phone number of my friend Moses Feinstein. You will call him. He expects your call. I spoke to him last week. He could use your help. This guy went to Rav Moshe Feinstein, the greatest codifier of Jewish law. Hardly a Lubavitcher Chassid, folks. The exact opposite. And he studied with him for 15 years. He's the author of the Yad Moshe. In every Orthodox home where there is a Igrit Moshe, where there's Rabbi Feinstein's writings, there is this index in Hebrew and in English to his writings, written by this man, who the Lubavitcher Rebbe sent to Rav Moshe Feinstein. And then the Rebbe turned to him and said, my goal is not to turn everyone into a Lubavitcher Chassid. My goal is to help every Jew in the world find their own comfort zone, their own comfort level. And that, folks, in my eyes, is the greatest thing I can tell you about the Lubavitcher Rebbe. He devoted his life to helping all of us find our comfort level. Thank you.